Children frighten me, and that's actually a good thing. You know, the fact of the matter is, kids these days, no longer all right. There's something to be said about the sudden rise of specialists in the field of behavioral health in the age range of 5 to 10-year-olds. I mean, you may find it odd to discover that my job of choice is that of a guidance counselor, given what I just said. The reason for this is because I feel that even though the young mind is an enigma, it's pure, it's innocent. And that's all the more reason to help the young who have been particularly traumatized by the rage and darkness that haunts this world today. Beyond my general counseling, I also provide a service for the local DHS and Child Protective Services to help foster homes and shelters for wards of the state. Typically, there's only 3 reasons why a facility of this kind will call upon my services, and it's always because I'm their last resort. Number 1, a child has begun to act out violently and is in need of therapeutic treatment to alter the behavior. Number 2, a child has begun to act out in a manner non-typical of their age group or individual education plan. For example, a rambunctious child suddenly becomes silent, or a boisterous child choosing to remain calm. 3, child's experiencing psychological problems relating to physical activity, such as wetting the bed, sweating profusely without explanation, or night terrors. So last Thursday, I was called in on a case involving Owl Creek RTC, where 8 of the children in Ward B exhibited all 3 of the symptoms, and apparently, it had gotten so bad they needed outside help. For all intents and purposes, Owl Creek is a place that really shouldn't have existed. Before it became a private orphanage, it was a boarding school, and before that, it was a hospital for developmentally disabled youths. In other words, it was a place where society sent children they could no longer handle themselves. Long, perfectly trimmed hedges and iron gates barred the ground from the outside world. A perfect utopia for these children to experience life unfettered from the abuse that likely shackled them in their whole lives. Here they could be free. Or at least, that was what it was meant to do. I recognized that those same protections could be perceived as a way to keep them unaware of life beyond these walls. The building itself was made of brick and long wooden trestles between slanted long glass windows. In every sense of the word, it resembled a fossil, a relic from a bygone era, and as I got closer to the front steps, I could still see the long scorch marks that had stained the stones during a fire that had likely occurred before I was even born. The entryway spread open into a more inviting atmosphere. A mixture of old and new architecture distracting onlookers enough to make them feel comfortable. Besides myself and the front receptionist, the chamber was empty, void of any other warm welcome. Kenneth Avery, to see Headmaster Rachel Browning? I told the short-statured blonde sitting behind the desk. She adjusted her Bluetooth headset and held up a bony finger before typing something out on her screen, then turning her full attention to me. She took my name again, and then paged the person in charge before making idle small talk. "How do you do it?" she asked me. Do what? "You've seen some of the worst things happen to the most innocent. How in the world do you keep going when time after time you come face to face with such despicable evil?" I opened my mouth to respond, but before I did, one of the larger wooden frame doors slammed shut, and a slim middle-aged woman approached us to greet me. "Dr. Avery, I'm so glad you can come on such short notice," she said, a faint smile passing her face. She looked worried, and I detected a lack of sleep in her voice. "Please, I don't have that title anymore. Just call me Avery, or Kenneth," I insisted, as she guided me away from the conversational desk clerk. "Sorry. I'm just so glad that you made it here. All the nurses are at our wits' end, to say the least," she explained, as she seemed to pick up the pace in the twisting corridors. "I'd like, if possible, to review the child's cases before I began evaluations," I told her. "I don't think that would be beneficial in this setting," she said softly, as we turned across a long, open courtyard to the secondary building, Ward B. "Did something happen?" I said. "You heard about the costumes, I assume?" "Yes, but I figured it was more than that. It's better if you come up with a fresh point of view, that's all." the headmaster answered. I couldn't argue with that logic, and there were too many times that a pre-existing opinion could stifle my observations. We made our way to the lounge where the nurses had gathered the 8 children for me to meet. All of them were different age, sex, and nationality. A regular bunch of kids, if I had ever seen one, playing with toys and puzzles as I entered the room. And also, all of them were wearing Halloween costumes. We've been trying to get them to cooperate to take them off, but the nurse trailed off as they shuffled their feet towards me inquisitively. All of them stopped a few feet away and stared up at me in unison. Well, this is uncomfortable, I joked as the nurse shuffled past the group to greet us. Where did they get the costumes, anyway? That's the thing, we don't really know, she admitted weakly. That alone made me uneasy. Mr. Avery, we've made accommodations for you to stay at the administration building. How many days do you expect to remain? She asked. As long as it takes, I said firmly, as I focused on the children. Something was very wrong here. Now, if you don't mind, I'd like to begin watching them as a group before I begin individual sessions. The 2 women showed themselves out. The children were still staring at me. I knew better than to show them the behavior made me uneasy, so instead, I slid a chair from the side of the room to the center of the circle. Once I had settled down, the 8 finally seemed to lose interest in me and return to their individual activities. Some were building with blocks, others gathering toys. All of it they were doing in complete silence. It was almost deafening how quiet it was. One boy, a 10-year-old, walked over to the arts and crafts and gathered some papers to begin to draw. I watched casually as he sketched out 8 stick figures in costumes, sitting around a circle, and I decided this was my moment to insert myself into the conversation. That's very good. Can you draw me too? I asked, pointing towards the center of the blank page. You don't belong there. HalloweenTime is just for us, the boy said simply, as instead he finished the 8 stick figures and had them holding hands like in a campfire circle. Really? Then, what are you drawing in the circle there? He started scribbling a man-like silhouette. Not saying a word, I watched as the drawing got larger and larger, and then he began to simply randomly scribble. Eventually he finished the main massive black blob and started scratching long etches towards each of the stick figures. They looked like tendrils. What is that? I asked casually as he finished the drawing. It didn't look friendly any longer. Mr. Badbones. He's just here with us always, the boy answered. One of the girls grabbed a hold of her knees and cried a little. Does this Mr. Badbones hurt you? Not all the time, the boy said, shaking his head. He looked like he wanted to cry. And when does it hurt you? It took Dr. Hanlon away. It'll take you away too, another girl whispered. I had read the report about my predecessor, but I still didn't understand how it could be connected to these children he hadn't practiced here in some time. How do you know about that? I asked the girl. It doesn't like you, the boy said. He kept scratching at the drawing, boring a hole into the paper. The girl kept rocking. She was mumbling something. Dead now, dead here. Time for all the dead to cheer. Dead now, dead here. Time for all the dead to cheer, she whispered, over and over. Did you come from here? Another girl added. She looked about 5. No, sweetie, it's just a show. I promise I can be your friend. I didn't understand the connection yet, but what they were doing frightened me. No, 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 she said, as she started to pull her hair out. Then she kept repeating the song over and over. I just want to help. Another little boy with curly hair stood up and glared at me. You think we're lying? You think it's not real, just like the others, he shouted and accused. I'm here to help, I repeated. We don't want you here. Go away! Go away! Go away! Go away! He screamed as he started tossing toys at me. I stood up defensively and exited their circle, surprised that all of them showed the same anxious fear about my presence, like I was a threat. What had happened to them? I summoned the headmaster back and we discussed the procedures that I planned out for the week ahead. Where did this HalloweenTime come from? I asked. They had seen on the news about their old counselor, Dr. Hanlon. It seems like it triggered something. That doesn't make sense. I did my research on the way over. What they're talking about, it doesn't exist. The headmaster bit her lip. I could tell she was holding something back. What haven't you mentioned? I asked coldly. I needed answers. Surprisingly, she gave them. They didn't want to tell you at first, but they all came from Asher Grove. I felt my mouth go dry. Suddenly, the trauma they had experienced made so much more sense. Asher Grove, if you're not familiar with it, is an unincorporated facility just west of here. It was meant to be a complex for a religious organization. In reality, it was a stronghold for a powerful cult. The things they did there, I couldn't even begin to describe. It also might explain some of their trauma, I thought, as I looked back in the room. The children were trying to hurt one another. Nurses rushed in to stop the violence, and I did my best to focus on the headmaster. When was this? About a year ago. Right around now. There are others we wanted to save, but circumstances didn't allow it, she explained softly. And you thought you could handle it yourself at first? They were never this way before. Just sort of spaced out. We thought they just needed time. Dr. Hanlon seemed to have a good grasp on them. And now he's likely in prison for attacking a mural, I muttered, shaking my head as I pondered over all these revelations. The children had stopped attacking one another thanks to the intervention of the nurses. Now they were all simply watching us like they wanted to be in our conversation. Some had scratch marks, or even one girl a bloody lip. Did they not recognize what they had done to themselves? Then they seemed to lose interest. The curly-haired boy that seemed against my arrival was beginning to play a game of Duck, Duck, Goose by using one of the toys as his instrument to pat his friend's head. It was a plastic toy used commonly for raking sand to improve motor skills. Then, as he finished the game and chose one of his friends, the curly-haired boy started to bash the toy against the other child's head. Good gracious, the other nurse exclaimed as she ran into the room and pulled him away. Curly Hair started to kick and scratch as she did. I watched for a short time and then turned my attention back to the headmaster trying to shake away the oddness of the whole situation. The boy that was bleeding from his forehead hadn't even cried. I moved into the room, staring at the boy in disbelief. His werewolf costume now covered in his friend's blood. What made you do that? I asked. Mr. Badbones, he whispered back. I felt a shudder as I realized these children seemed brainwashed. Then a nurse screamed, Emma? Where's Emma? We locked down the building and tried to find her. But the little girl had vanished. She went to HalloweenTime, one of the girls told me as we gathered the others together. And how does one get there? I asked them. Asher's, a boy whispered. The others seemed frightened by the mention of the name. Later that night, I watched the children on camera get into their beds. They were zombies, or maybe puppets. And I knew that meant someone was pulling the strings. It was all starting to come together, but not quite cohesively yet. If I was going to discover dark secrets of HalloweenTime, I had to find out what happened at Asher's Grove. I swallowed a gulp of air as I shuddered. Visiting a cult was not what I had in mind for a fall festival. Hey there, kids, and happy Halloween. It's me, MrCreepyPasta, and I wanted to tell you thank you so much for watching tonight's video, or listening to tonight's episode, this Oktoberfest, on the podcast. If you're not listening on the podcast, then you always can listen on the podcast at Spotify, or just about anywhere you find a podcast. And if you're not listening on YouTube, then you can find it on YouTube, or just about anywhere you find a YouTube. If any of you guys are interested in some of the audiobooks or actual books that have horror stories in them that I've worked on, you can always check out that description down below. In there's a couple of different links to some horror books and horror audiobooks and new things, like hopefully there'll be a Tales from the Gas Station Volume 3 link down there in the next few days, which I'm referring to right now, because if you look and it's out, it'll be there. Also, I wanted to say thank you all of you who are supporting me on Patreon. It's patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta. If you ever want to help support the show, keep the lights on, feed my cats and the like, you can always head over to patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta, and you can support the show there. Even $1 is greatly appreciated. And I have a very special thank you to these guys, such as Jordan Alexander Sanchez, Mr. Thud, Ken Lando Higuchi, Chompski, Nico Kaeo, Tristain Pelton, Stephen VanHuss, Chance Burnett, Deanna Kraus, G. Weevil 3, TheRedOakShieldVirus, CoryxKenshin, Pothead Holmes, Rival 1, JimboTheHutt, Caspian, Jordan Nells, The Village Witch, Hades' Nephew, Jordan Wayne Deckard, Bradley Leipe, and Charron, Acid System, Mike Bullock, Fooly Cooly Dude, Prozac and Pancake Appreciation, Brian Arse, Cryptic Nightmares, Shadow Morningstar, Brianna Wright, Someone You Love, Said the King 56, Bad Honey, S-Man, Kiri the Sloth, Thomas Burgett, Liam Newman, Sky Harbor, Caleb Dougal, Last Blade Song, Rafael Rodriguez, The Ginger Bros, and Aaron Stormcrow. And another thank you to all you guys who are in the description down below. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you all for listening. And I hope you all have a wonderfully happy Halloween. Sweet dreams.